This webinar is on the Report Designer Introduction. So there's going to be a few things that you will need to have taken out of the first or one of the first two webinars, and you'll see as we go. The first thing we need to do is go into the Report Designer. And you'll notice that the Report Designer is very similar to the Forms Designer, whereas it prompts for a file name and a report name. Like the Forms Designer, all the reports are saved into the DBI reports. All the format is stored into the DBI reports file. So we're going to start with a file, DB client. We're using the same file we used in the previous webinars that show the name and address of clients. And we'll just give it a report name. We'll call it Web Report 11. And we'll do it in uppercase. Oh, I guess I already have that one out there, so let's do Web Report 12. Description is a standard description for the report, which will display in the top banner for the user when they start running this report. So we'll just say client sales report. Again, a long description, programmer's description of what this report does. The style group that you're going to use. Now, normally you're going to use a style group that is slightly different than your style group that you're using for your forms, only because you're going to want your fonts to be a little bit different. Your headings are going to be a little bit bigger, and so forth. So I'm going to use DBI REP. You can also take that and copy it to a new name and create your own style sheet for your reports. Every report needs a selection. So the way DesignBais works with this is that we create a selection process to feed into the report. So let's go and take a look at the selection process. Well, the one we're going to use is DB client underscore search 1. Let's take a look at that. And I'll bring up another session and go into selection process. Call up DB client and search 1. This is the same search process that we used in the previous webinar. So you can see it's doing an S-select of the DB client with client name equal to whatever is in brackets entered in entry point 1. Entry point 1 down here is defined as the client name. So the first thing that's going to be prompted for is client name. And then we're saying and with the suburb equal to whatever is entered in entry point 2. Entry point 2 is suburb. And then we're sorting it by account manager. Okay. Everything after that is not needed. So you don't need to put in any display data because you're not using it for displaying this particular data. We're going to enter the data on the form. So these fields are not necessary. Now, this like this selection process is used in other forms, so it's going to have this selection, this display information. The same thing with you. You may have a selection process that you want to use for your reports that's being used in multiple places, and that's fine. DesignBais just won't use this information. So that's basically the DesignBais selection form. Again, it's just going to use this select and this entry piece and to build the selection to feed into the report. It's the same as saying in a basic program, select a DB client file and then do a loop reading the next item. And that's what DesignBais does. It does the select, does a read next, reads the record, and prints each row for that record. Any questions about that before I move on a little bit? Okay. Let's go back to the report designer. So now I have a subroutine that I can run before the report. Some reports need work files, and that's just the nature of the beast. So if you need to build a work file before your report and use that work file, maybe it combines files and brings other data in from other areas, then you can run a subroutine that does that and then runs the report. You can run a subroutine before your read process. After the read process. So, like I said, DesignBais does a read next, does a select, and then a read next, and it reads the first record, the file record, into DB record. So after it reads the first record, after it reads each row into DB record, it can run a subroutine at this read process, so that you can have you can tell DesignBais to build work variables, read other records, do whatever you want in an after report read. This is very similar to the after read in the forms designer, except it only works on the main read of the form. Form types, we have A4, letter, legal, and also custom. So if there's anything that doesn't fit in those, you can create your own custom forms by putting in the height and width in pixels and what the left margin, how far over you want the left margin to print. And that's all in pixels. So I'm going to select letter. Bottom margin if you're going to use it. Some printers don't use a bottom margin, so that's 40 pixels up. Are you going to override the left margin and go all the way over to the left? The orientation, portrait or landscape. I'll stick with portrait for now because I don't need a wide form. So now we're looking at the setup of the print form itself. Do we want to include a header section for header information? Do we want to include a column header section? Do we want to include a detail section for all the detail records and a footer section? The only other thing I'm going to need here, we'll go into 2pass and use drop-down codes in the advanced form report designer. We're not going to go into that right now. I'm going to select the default to preview mode. What that allows us to do is run the report to the page control that you've seen at the last time in DesignBais. So you see the page control, and it comes up and displays all the information, lets you page through it. So this is the default. We'll get into these other items later on in this webinar, but for now we'll leave those alone. That's all I really need to start, so I can drop down and go into click on Designer and run the designer. So now you'll notice that I have a heading section, a column header section, a detail section, and a footer. And of course you'll also notice that I have a red line indicator on my border of my form, of my report. So that's the space that you have to build your report. Like the Forms Designer, you have a grid 10 pixels wide by 10 pixels deep. The bigger boxes are 50 pixels by 50 pixels. Okay? And now all you really need to do is start adding fields to the form. So again, I can go into Add Field, which gives me a pull-down list of all of my fields and lets you add one field at a time. Or I can go into my fast field entry, and enter in multiple fields that pop into this field properties, and when I start typing, it will pop up a predictive index suggesting which fields I really want to use. In this case, I'm going to say I want the client code, so the client code will pop out. Okay, so now I have the ability to select a type. Do I want to print the client code with a label in the header? So in this instance, with that selected, it will display the column header in the column heading section, and then my data in the detail section. If I say in detail, it'll take both the field text and the text box and place them both in the detail section. Output field only, the text from the field for the label, text only for labels, images you can place on here. Derived fields are like work fields but don't have to be defined earlier, defined previously in the form field, in the field properties. We're not going to get into derived fields today. We're going to reserve those for the advanced report designer. We will get into break field and box and line. So in the header, I'm going to add this, and I'll add it right there. So I just clicked in the detail where I wanted the field to be, and it popped the description and the text label up into the column heading, because I told it I wanted that to do that, and the detail is now, the text field is down in the detail. Let's add a couple more fields. We'll do name, and we'll add that name, add it, place it right there. Okay, so now I've got my name and my field and my client code. So now every time you run the report, you must save it, because DesignBais works on the saved format of the report. Unlike the Forms Designer, where you don't have to save to test the report, to test the form. You must save to test the report. So I'm going to click on Save, turn the test mode on, and you'll notice now that it goes out to the selection process and is now prompting me for my client name and the city and town. Those were the first two fields that I'm prompting for. It also defaults to preview mode. If I run the report, because I defaulted it to preview mode, it's going to pop up my page control. So you can see it's giving me a list of 8 pages and straight down the report. Okay, sorted by account manager, so you're not going to see any real data here. I'm sorry. You're not going to see it sorted in any particular fashion, because it's by account manager. Okay, so I have my pages. You've seen all this before. You could search APO. We'll do a search, so it brings me right to that item. I could search next, and there are none. That's fine. I have the ability right from here to print, to go into a printer, print preview, convert to PDF, email it to myself, store it permanently in a cabinet. We won't go into cabinets, but Express and cabinets have their own webinar in a few weeks. And you can delete the report. You can also send it to an Excel document. Okay, so let's go and add a few more fields. So now, like we had shown in the Getting Started section, we have a file called DB Client Sales, which stores the sales data for each client. The ID is the client code for that file. So on the client code, I can bring up its properties, and just like in the Forms Designer, I can read a client code when this client code hits the report. So I've already used DB record, okay, is my read in my read next, so that's my default record. So in this case, I use DB record, so the read group has already been used for read group 1. So I need to use read group 2 as my starting read group. And read step, whoops, no delimiter. I'm reading it into DB other record 2. DB record was already used for my report read. And I'm going to read it from the DB client sales. Again, I can run a subroutine before I do my read and a subroutine after I do my read, exactly like the Forms Designer. Submit that. Okay, so now I've done my read on my client sales. Now I can start adding from the client sales file the data. I'm sorry. The data from the client sales file. So let's go into month-to-date sales. Okay, and we'll add that to this list. Let's do a DBS, and then we'll bring in year-to-date. I'm control-clicking on year-to-date, and it'll just throw it right into the list. Control-clicking on last year's sales, it'll just throw it right into the list. When I click on Add and place these items on the form, you'll notice it simply adds all three right next to each other. Let's clean this up a little bit because it's a little bit too small. So we'll just say last year's sales. Whoops. Okay, so now I've got some data. Let's save the report and turn the test mode on again. Run the report. Okay, so now you can see I have both my client file and my client sales being populated on this report. And all I had to do was start to read and add fields from that file. I haven't done any programming yet to build that stuff. And throughout this entire webinar, we're not going to program at all to build this report. Any questions about what I've done so far? No? Okay, let's move on. Okay, so now that I've got my sales data, I also have an account manager, which is attribute 25 of the DB client file. Remember, we sorted this list by account manager. So now let's display the account manager. So I'll go into Fast, and I'll say account manager. Whoops. Not in that file, in the client file. And we'll take the account manager and place it onto the form, and we'll place it right here. Let's take a look at that. Save, test mode on, run the report. Okay, so now my account manager is there for each of my clients. But I don't really want the account manager letter. What I want is the account manager's name. So I will highlight the account manager and go into Properties. And now I'll read from, this is my third read group, load that into DB Other Record 3, and read that from the executive file. Submit that. So now I'm doing my read once the account manager changes. So now I've got that read. Now I can go in and I can add from the executive file the name of the executive. Okay, we'll just add exec name. Whoops. Exec name. There we go. Add it, and we'll place it right there. Okay, it needs to be adjusted. For some reason, it's right justified. Let's make sure that this isn't right justified. There we go. Now, since I have my executive here, do I really need my account manager? In most cases, not. So I'm going to take the account manager, and I'm going to move it out here. We still need the account manager as part of the report, but by placing it outside of my page width, it basically makes this field hidden, but still in the report. So the read still happens, but the account manager is not displayed. Now I can take this account manager, the name, and move it over. Let's save it and turn the test mode on. So now my account manager, the name is in each of the records on each row. Any questions about that? Okay, so now, because I'm sorting by account manager my selection process, I can also break on that account manager and show the subtotals for each account manager. So let's do that. Let's go into Fast, and in the selection type, I'm just going to simply click on break field. With break field, you don't need a field name. So break field. Now, which field do I want to break on? And I'm going to tell it I want to break on the account manager. So every time the account manager changes, we're going to get a break. Click on Add, and I'll place that. I'll click underneath the detail, but outside of the page. So it throws my break right underneath my row. I have a couple questions, but I will get to those as soon as I can. So now I have the break. DesignBais by default subtotals every numeric field on a form. So all I have to do to get DesignBais to display a subtotal is place those fields underneath the breakpoint for the account manager. So I'll go back into my client sales file. Instead of bringing a break field, I'm going to be an output field only. So I don't want the text for that field. And I'll do DBS. And I will take the month-to-date sales, year-to-date sales, and last year's sales, add them to the form, and place them right there. So now I've got all of those. Let's make sure my alignment is correct. No, it's not. I'm going to select it from the default. And I can also say that my executive, I don't want their name to be displayed on every line, but only on the break. So I could take this executive and move it down here. And then I could say Fast and go in and display, do it a field only, and do, come on, Rick, what am I doing? Subtotal 4. We'll just make that bold so it pops out a little bit. And we'll place that right there. Subtotal 4. We'll change this to be a bold also so it sticks out a little bit. And now let's save and test the report. Okay, so I forgot to remove the name, but I'll remove that. If we forward through the report, you'll notice that when the account manager changes, it breaks on that account manager, displays the account manager in the total, and gives me a subtotal for each of those fields. Now, once it does the break, it will zero out the subtotal line like you would expect it to, and start over again. I do have a couple questions. Let's see. Can you sort the report by a field not in the primary file? Yes, you can. We're not going to get into that today. There's other areas that we can do. As long when you sort the record, all it's doing is building a selection process. So it's just like building an English statement. So the byline can be anything as long as the dictionary is in the dict file that you're selecting. So if it's a translate that goes to another file, whatever, yes, you can select that, use that as your sort criteria. I just arrived. How can I get webinars recorded? The webinars are automatically being recorded. At the end of this webinar, I will load this recorded webinar onto our YouTube channel. So just search the YouTube for DesignBais, and the channel will pop up, and then there will be 3 after today webinars that we've previously done. So the last 3 will be already on there. Any other questions about this before I move on? Can you use iType field definitions instead of pick style? You cannot. The only thing you can use iTypes for is for selection processes. You can't use them on a report. Or on a form. You can use them in a selection process. Okay, so you saw that the subtotals were immediately after each of the records, and then the next breakpoint was displayed. To change that property, I can go into the properties of the break and click on page break, so that now every time it hits one of those items, every time it hits the breakpoint, it's going to print the subtotals and then eject the page. Let's save that, turn the test mode on, and we'll forward through this. So now you see the subtotal for David McLean, and it did an automatic page break. So it's a little bit cleaner. The next pages, okay? So it's a lot cleaner by putting in page breaks. Let's clean this up a little bit also. You see that my heading has a chunk of space in here before it actually gets to the first data row, and there's a row in between each of these data items. So let's clean that up a little bit. You'll notice that my column heading has a lot of white space. So all I'm going to do is select the detail and move it up. Click where I want it to be in this outside line. And you notice it just moves it right up. Now you also notice that there's a row in between the start of the detail section and the data itself. So it's going to display a row, a blank row, in between each item. So to get rid of that, I'm going to go to delete row, and I'm just going to remove that row. So now, and let's get rid of this puppy, delete that field. So I'll save it and turn the test mode on, run the report. Okay, so now you see I cleaned it up a lot. I've got space. I removed the spaces from in between the heading and the detail, and there's no space in between. Okay, let's do a little bit more here. Let's add a grand total now. So we've got the subtotal. Now we need to add a grand total. So we'll go into Fast, and we'll select Break Field again. But this time, the field is going to be Report Total. Instead of breaking on an actual field, at the end of the report, display the break total. So we'll add that, and we'll add it underneath the break. So now you see it says Break Report Grand Total. Again, I'm going to go into Fast, and my sales, go into my client sales, output field only, show all the fields, and I'll take month to date, year to date, and last year, add them to the form, and I'll place those right there. And let's make sure that, whoops, sorry, wrong button. And let's go into Properties, and I'll change that to the default style, change this to the default style, and change this to the default style. I can also add some text for report, oops, report grand total, and we'll make that bold and give it 100. Add it, and we'll place it right there. So that's my report grand total. I will save and turn the test mode on. Run the report. There we go. So now, then I forward through. This just happens to break on that line. So if I added another row to David McLean, you would see that it's not actually breaking on the page. Okay, and that's Andrew. And if we go to the end, there's my grand total. Okay, I do have a couple questions. Bill, I'm not going to get into that right now. Basically, I-types can only be used for selection processes. Okay. Okay, so now let's pretty up this report a little bit. I'm sure in one of the two webinars you saw the ability to highlight rows. In the the first webinar, which was the overview, you saw the customer report had every other row highlighted. To do that, I'm going to go into Fast, and I'm going to select the box line. And that allows me to draw a box around specific data. I'm going to add that, and I'm going to place it right next to my client code. So you'll see it drew a box. Now, because I drew the box in the detail section, that box will happen for every row in the detail section. Let's go into the properties of that. And instead of making it a column span of 100, let's make it column span of 780. That'll cover my entire page. And a row span of about 12 pixels. Now I'm going to make the line color, you can see the line outline is black. I'm going to make that a very light gray blue. And the background color, I'm going to make the same thing, so that it doesn't actually have a border. And then, let's submit that. Okay, so now you see that I have that outline. If I select another row, I can't actually see that on here, but let's save it and turn the test mode on. And you see now that every row has a highlight. Well, we don't want that. So let's go back into the properties of that field. And in this repeat box in detail section, I'm going to say, starting at row 1, display this box every other row. So every second row, you're going to have a box being displayed. Let's take a look and see what the result of that. So basically, it's going to skip a row. Okay? So now every other row is highlighted. Any questions about that? I can also do things like every third row. Whoops. And if we press F1, it'll tell us a little bit more about that, just like I've just done it. Okay? So every third row, I'm not going to test that. You'll see it as when we do the next test. Okay, I also, there's no separation really aesthetically between the detail and the column heading. So let's place a line going across in the header section. So I'm going to have a box line again, and I'm going to place that in the column heading section. So now, because it starts in the column heading, it will only be in the column heading. One quick second. Okay. So now, let's go into the properties, and we'll change this to 780, so it goes all the way across. And the row span of 1, because I don't want it to look like a box. I want it to look like a line. And the line color is going to be black. The outside border is black. Let's move this down a touch. We'll just say 185. So it moves it down to row 185 and starts it there. And I'll save that. Turn the test mode on. And now you can see I have a line only in the column heading. So if I forward through each one. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, good. Let's put a line at the subtotals. So I'll go to fast again. We'll do another line, and if I put it underneath the breakpoint, and let's see, what was it? How many spaces? So we got 150, 160, 80, 90, 200. We'll say approximately 210. No, 200, all good. Okay, so from that point, 200, row of 50, we'll move it down a little bit. So we'll go 225. So it'll move this down to the midway into that box. And there, now I've got a row going all the way across. You can change that slightly. 5, so it's just as big. There we go. Save. Test mode on. Run the report. When I forward to the next page, you see I have an underline at my subtotals. You'll be able to see it better here. See, there's an underline at the subtotal. Okay. Any questions about that? We can also put a bigger box around the grand total, so it looks a little better. Put that there. So that's 6. That's 310, 311. I'm sorry, 320. So we'll say column span of 320, row span of 30. And let's make the color yellow, just so it sticks out and we can see it. Whoops, make it a little bigger. Actually, let's make it the same color as, and we'll make this a little bit bigger, 40. There we go. So now I've got my grand total. So all I did was make it the same color as this highlight. Turn the test mode on. Run it, wait until it finishes, because we're not going to have a grand total until it finishes the report. This goes all the way over there. Now it says completed. Let's go to the end. There, now I've got my grand total, and I've got my box and my gray around it. Any questions about that? You guys are easy. Okay. Few more things. We've got a heading up here. So let's add some header lines to make this a better report. So I'm going to go into fast, and instead of the box line, I'm just going to select text. And so this will be the client, if I could spell, client sales report, and I will select this as the label header. I will add it to the form, and I'm going to place it right there. Now, the reason I place it all the way over to the left is because I want it centered. So I'll go into the properties of this field, and I'll say, okay, so now my column span is 780. And I'm going to center this field. So now I don't have to worry about the size of the field or figuring out where the center of my form is to place this field. It's automatically going to be centered. Whoops, sorry, I meant to click elsewhere. There we go. Let's add some more text. We can say by account manager and leave that label the way, we could say bold just to make it look prettier. Add it again. I'm going to add it all the way over to the left hand side. Make this, so that's already centered. Make this 780. So now it's centered on my report. Add, okay, so now I want to add, I can also take the account manager and add it to the form. If you look, when we ran the report, you had no idea what the account manager was until you got to the grand total. Until you got to the break point. So as long as you're breaking on the page, you can put the account manager or the break point in your heading. So if I go into fast, I go into the executive, and I say name, take the executive name as an output only field, add it to the form. Again, I'm going to put it all the way on the edge, and I'm going to say that it's 780 characters. And I probably want to move it up a row. There we go. Save that and turn the test mode on. And now you'll see the result of that. Okay, so now I've got David McLean in the heading, even though the break did not happen until the next page. Okay, and the same with the next. So it changes on the break, but I have DesignBais understands what that page is. Any questions about that? We also have a footer section. And in that footer section, I could place a few static fields, or a few fields, let's say. So I want to select text only and say, okay, well, let's put in page at pages, no, it's capital, page, of at pages. And we'll place that over here. So I got my page numbers, and I'll also say label, text only, run on at date at time. It's probably going to have to be around 150. Add that, place that right there. Okay, save it, and I'll turn the test mode on. You'll notice that I have page 1 of I don't know, because it doesn't know how many pages until it's completed. So now that it's completed, it says 1 of 8, and you can see my run on date and time. I do have a couple questions here. What happens to the formatting when you download it to Excel? In this current release, when you download to Excel, it's going to be downloaded as a comma-delimited file, so that the data is, or a CSV format file. So you're just going to get the raw data. You're not going to get any formatting. In a future release, we're going to download to Excel in an XML document which will have all of the format. I'm not sure about all of the formatting, but will have a lot of the formatting that you use in your report will be imported into Excel. And that's coming up in a future release. Okay, can I print one header for the first page and a different header for the internal pages? No, but you can print, that's a good question, and it's probably going to get covered in the advanced. I'm not sure if that exact question is going to get covered. I can check that out for you. I'm not 100% sure you can do that. Send me an email to support@designbais.com, and I will answer that for you, or I will get an answer for you on that. Any other questions about this? Okay, once you have your report built, I'm going to go and exit here. Well, let's just run the report again. Now, once I have the report built, I can, as we've been running it, it's running it as a detail, but I can also run it as summary only. So basically what that's going to do is it's not going to print all of the detail. It's only going to print the subtotals. So if I run the report, it'll take a couple seconds. And then you see it has all of the subtotals. So you can run it as full detail, or what we like to call in DesignBais, in PIC, detail suppress. Let's X out of there. And we'll make sure this is saved, then we'll exit. So once your report is done, and you don't want it to go, if you don't want it to go to default mode, you don't have to default that in if you don't want it to go to preview mode, sorry, you don't have to default that. If you want the report to always go to a summary, you could check that. Or at least it defaults to summary. So when you run the report, that summary box is checked. Only run the report in summary, or only run the report in detail. So you won't, if these two are checked, you won't have the option to uncheck the summary. And if detail only, you won't have the option to select a summary. There's a question. So running as a summary ignores page breaks. Yes, it does. And that's done purposely. You don't want to have page breaks at each break. So yes. Okay. So that's basically the report. But there's also one other thing that I want to go over. And that is, since we have a couple more minutes, that is the ability to have, let's go back here, run the report, turn the test mode on, run. I'm sure in the getting started with DesignBais, you saw that DesignBais had the ability to have a hotspot on the report and basically go into a drill down mode, so that when one of these customer IDs are clicked, it can bring up the customer form. Okay? So let's take a look at that, and let's see how we do that. I'm going to go into the field properties for the client file, and when I click on the client code, I want it to bring up the form. So I'm going to go into DBC, client code, and down at the bottom of the form, you'll see process to invoke on report click. And so at this point, I will say, I do have a question. Let's see. This webinar will cover on report function. No, this will not cover on-form reports. There is a full other webinar for on-form reports that will happen in a couple weeks, but we are not going over on-form reports in this webinar. This is strictly the report designer. Sorry. Okay, so in process to invoke on report, I'm going to say DB client, I'm sorry, it was DB website underscore test drive. So this was the form that you saw. It's DBI website. The form that you saw in the demo the first day on the web page. And I'm going to tell it that I'm going to stack the DBC client code onto the report so that the very first thing it enters is the client code, and the client code would then be brought up in the form. So let's submit that. Go back to our report, run the report. So as soon as I did that, now you'll notice that the client code is now clickable. So when I click on one of these items, it runs that form and pops up the customer maintenance. Okay, you can actually tell DesignBais only to pop this up in an inquiry mode if you wanted to, so that they can't physically enter anything. If this was an invoice report, you don't want the user to be able to change the invoice. So when they click on the invoice number, you want to go into invoice inquiry. So the same program can be, the same form can be displayed in either an entry mode or an inquiry mode. And you can do the same thing with this. And you have all the functionality. So I have transactions that I can run and display all the transactions. I can actually clear this and bring up another one. See 00100. But in an inquiry mode only, you would disable all of these fields, and the only field that would be enabled would be maybe a close button. Okay, so let's exit out of there. That's all I had for the Report Designer intro. Are there any questions before I end this webinar? I will stay on for a couple minutes and answer any other questions. But that is basically it. Well, I thank you for your time. Our webinars are taking a little bit of a hiatus. We will not have another webinar until the beginning of the next year. So thank you very much. I'm sure that I think the next webinar is on the January 6th or so, and I think it's the Forms Designer Advanced. Thank you very much. Oh, I have a question here about the Release 6. It will be we've had a couple issues that very minor issues that caused the release to go back to development, but it is importing again and will be available early next week. So I thank you very much for your time, and have a great holiday and a safe and healthy New Year. Bye-bye.